Our next speaker is Professor Elke Arendt from University College Cork in Ireland. Elke lectures and carries out research in the area of cereals, malting, brewing science, and specific food focusing on gluten-free foods and beverages, starcher culture, functional beverages, rheology, and food structure. And we heard that the gluten-free products is one product category that is increasing in Sweden, and I also know it in many other places around the world. So this is a very hot area today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. I would like to congratulate the two prize winners, very well deserved, those prizes to the people they were given to. And it's obviously an honor for me to give this presentation. And I would like to ask you, Per, to maybe give me a 5-minute warning when my time is up. I practice my talks, and they always only take the 30 minutes. And then I start getting in front of an audience and I start chatting. So the talk is ridiculously long then, so I would really appreciate, and I have small sections which I can leave out, so I'm flexible. Okay, we heard this morning a lot about what the consumer wants, where are the new marketing trends, and I seem to be really in trend with my gluten-free research. I've been working on gluten-free research for approximately 20 years. And the first, let's say, 15 years, nobody wanted me to talk about. I was always the last speaker in the last session, and people were just walking out on me. So it has changed in the last 5 years. I do other research too, but people keep wanting me only for gluten-free. So why did I start 20 years ago working on gluten-free when nobody was interested in that? I teach to undergraduate students, and I live in an area where 1 in 20 has actually celiac disease. So people who need to have gluten-free research done for them. And one of my undergraduate students came in with a sandwich and offered it for me to eat it, which is a bit weird, but look, you're flexible as a lecturer, so I tried it. It was awful. And he said, could I do an undergraduate project with you and explore if we can get better food products for celiac patients? So he dragged me then to all these association meetings, and I got to meet them. And as a researcher, usually we help larger companies to make more money, to develop enzymes for them, or whatever. But this was actually an area where you could make an impact to people's lives. So I was I'm very passionate about this, and I met the people, you know, I remember my first couple of breads, and you went to the Celiac Association, and this 80-year-old granny who says, oh, the best bread I ever had. And, you know, so you really got to feel you're doing something good. Now, let me talk about, now you know why it takes me so long. So celiac disease. If you want to be on a gluten diet, it usually is associated to celiac disease. This is an autoimmune disease which affects the intestinal of the people who have that disease. And it's an intolerance to the gluten protein, which we heard a lot about, and it's very handy for my own presentation. So in our intestine, we have these microvilli, you know, which are important for enzyme production, absorption of micronutrients. And you can see they have this kind of a shape. When you have celiac disease, they're flat. So it's a bit like if you're eating food, normally in a normal person, it's like you have a carpet to absorb the nutrients nicely. And then when you're a celiac patient, it's like a tiled floor where stuff just goes right through. So diarrhea is one of the side effects of celiac disease. So if you're taking up gluten, it changes the upper part in your intestine and looks like this, which leads then to malabsorption of micronutrients such as iron, etc. Now, the bad news is that it's a genetic predisposition, runs within families. And the even worse news is that 30% of the world population has a gene for it, so it has the potential to actually get that disease if the environmental factor and immunologically based inflammation takes place. Nowadays, the doctors are saying that celiac disease, we only have discovered the tip of the iceberg. These are the 1% which are known to have celiac disease and live accordingly. Below the waterline, you have the patients who have slight problems, but not diagnosed because it's hard to diagnose sometimes. And then here you have the one with a genetic predisposition. So now, when you say celiac disease, everybody associates this with the intestine, but that's not the case. It affects all parts of your body, from your brain to your reproductive organs. They're all affected by celiac disease. And if you're not going on a gluten-free diet in time, you actually will have serious health repercussions. Now, the bad part of being a celiac or having to live on a gluten-free diet is that you can't eat wheat, you can't eat barley, which means no beer, or you can't have rye. Here in these parts of Scandinavia, people love their rye. And then oats is still a little bit under discussion. I mean, there is my Dutch colleagues who claim that all oat is gluten-free. I'm not 100% because we have prolines in there and there's still contamination issues. So I still keep it as a question mark. So they can't eat bread, biscuits, pizza, they can't have beer. So it's quite a limited and pleasureless life in a way, from a food point of view. So what can those people actually eat? They can eat rice, they can eat maize, sorghum, teff, finger millet, all grains which are not exactly popular. You know, my rice maybe, but I mean, make a bread out of rice, I'll show you later, it's not much fun. Then you have all those pseudo cereal. Oh my God, they're so healthy. But have you ever eaten 100% quinoa bread? I won't recommend it, it's awful. So nowadays, why is it so popular? All of a sudden everybody eats gluten-free, they want to eat gluten-free, and that's only because of these 1 to 2% celiac disease patients. It's a bit weird, but it's not just because of them. Nowadays, we also have the people which are gluten sensitive. Nobody really knows what it is, but anyway, those people don't particularly like eating gluten. They can make up to 10 to 20% of the population. We have the people with a wheat protein allergy, very small percentile. Has been shown when people have autism and they go on a gluten-free diet, they improve. And then you have this big, large, the IBS people. Nowadays, a lot of people who are suffering from irritable bowel syndrome are recommended to go on a gluten-free diet. Now, they're not on a gluten-free diet because they can't tolerate gluten. They can tolerate gluten, but what they can't tolerate is FODMAPs. These oligosaccharides which are causing havoc in their intestine. And this has happened to be that the gluten-free cereals don't have much of those havoc-causing oligosaccharides. So these fellows now also eat a gluten-free diet. Certain skin disorders are getting better. And then the lifestyle choice people. They're the best ones. You know, you go on the internet and you ask, what are you doing? Oh, I'm on a gluten-free diet. I want to be hip. So I go on a gluten-free diet. And why do you do that? Oh, it's so much healthier for you. You know, I debate that, and I'll show you why I debate that later. And you lose a ton of weight. Sure, stuff tastes bad. You know, obviously you use a ton of weight. You know, instead of having a lovely wheat bread, you're eating this miserable little gluten-free slice. Sure, you lose weight. So you have all these kind of VPs who say, okay, we are losing weight, and then the teenagers eat the same stuff, and they do lose their weight because the quality isn't that great. And then obviously you have the people on special diets and the relations of above. So 9 out of 10 consumers are buying gluten-free. They're not celiac patients. And only very few of them really need it. So if we look at the gluten-free market, it has been growing and growing and growing. My prediction is it will stop growing unless there is a big jump in the quality of food. It's about 25% growth per year. I mean, you look down, you have an apple nowadays, especially in the States, they're overdoing a bit. No offense to anybody from America, but they write on an apple gluten-free. Obviously, it's gluten-free. So every couple of years, we do a marketing study where we check out all the products from all over the world. Being a scientist is has its benefits. You have friends all over the world, and they're kind enough to send you their product. So we do that every couple of years. We taste the stuff. And there has been improvement, particularly Ireland and England. There is some very good products out there, some attributed to the research I've done, which I'm quite happy about. But you also see there is a lack of nutrients. Very often they're starch-based. And what you found that some of the best sellers have a high fat content. And I'll come to that in just a minute. So here is just the broad spectrum on nutritional values which you have for gluten-free foods. The calories vary from about 200 to over 300. And now look at the fat, you know. And anything which has a load of fat in tastes good. I mean, needless to say. But it's not exactly good for you. So you have here, there is some products, and there is one product, I don't like shaming products, but that one I have to. It's called Genius. Yeah, they're Genius with 13% fat. Poor celiacs, they're eating bread, and they think they're eating bread, and what they're eating is a bit like cake every day. So, and some of them have put on a lot of weight, so it's no fun. So the fat content, sometimes they compensate for the lack of flavor, the lack of structure by just throwing an awful lot of fat inside. Protein content is generally low, carbohydrate content depends now how much fiber they have. The good thing that a lot of the gluten-free products, to create structure, you use fiber, so they have quite a high fiber content. Now, I was lucky now that Jan was before me, so he explained everything about how you make bread and what you have to look for. I'll still go through it quickly. So you take wheat, flour, water, salt, and a bit of yeast, and what you create is a lovely dough. And what you see in there when you look under the microscope, I'm not sure how clear this is here, you see this gluten network forming, which holds onto your water, which gives you structure and makes a dough machinable. So then I proof it. That means I produce CO2, I produce flavor, etc. And then I bake it. And then I get a structure. Traditionally, we also have about 60% water in a wheat bread. And what happens then is that during baking, my protein denatures and my starch gelatinizes. But my starch does not gelatinize fully. I have a certain amount of ungelatinized starch there as well. Now, when I take a gluten-free flour, water, a bit of salt, etc., the same base formulation as what you find in wheat, what I get is a batter. I proof it, I bake it, and then I get a product which looks as miserable as that. And then when I look under the microscope up here, I can see, okay, there is no network formation. I have randomly organized protein. And then what I have down here is, because in gluten-free baking you have always an excess of water, I have a full gelatinization of my starch part in the flour. So that's a big difference. Now, since I'm doing it for 20 years, I have explored about every avenue you can think of, from the different flours, from the different functional ingredients, hydrocolloids, improvers, fibers. If you work gluten-free, I can tell you anything you know from wheat doesn't apply. Nothing. You know, you put an emulsifier and it does nothing for you in gluten-free. You know, or certain enzymes which are, you know, God's gift to bakers, useless. So, you know, you'd really have to think outside the box. That's one thing you learn when you're working gluten-free. We've also used processing aids, enzymes, some of goods, most of them are useless. We've looked at fermentation. I'm a big fan of lactic acid bacteria, as you will learn. And we've also looked at malting, and I was very pleased with your last remark. I also have a big brewing group, by the way, a lovely pilot scale brewery. So we do a lot of malting research too. Now let me talk about gluten-free cereals and their characterization. So here's the picture again I showed you earlier. So here are all these nice grains we have available to us. You can't work with any of them individually. You usually have to mix them if you want to get any kind of a product. But you have to also keep in mind what are the nutritional needs of your consumers. So this is something I got from Professor Kennedy from Trinity. He's a gastroenterologist, and he basically tells you, I mean, when you diagnose a patient, he's lacking pretty much everything because stuff just runs through them. Then when you put them on a gluten-free diet, things get a little bit better. And on a long-term diet, they're missing fiber, they're missing folate, niacin, and pyridoxine. I mean, fiber isn't a surprise. 1 in 4 consumers don't get enough fiber, so the celiacs are no different. But anyway, because they have so many gut problems, it's good to address it. So what we did, we bought an awful lot of gluten-free flours, which are available. We nutritionally characterized them. We made breads with them, model breads, and then also characterized these products. So here are just the list of all the different flours we had. Strangely enough, for the majority of the gluten-free flours, we only get wholemeal flours. It's not surprising when you think of teff. I don't know how many. Normally when I talk to my undergrads, I have these little sachets full of the different grains inside. Should have brought them here as well. I mean, teff is like a sand corn. So, you know, making kind of an endosperm flour out of that is a bit of a challenge, to say the least. So a lot of these grains are wholemeal flours. Other ones are endosperm flours. So we characterize them for fat, protein, moisture, carbohydrate, and ash. And when you look at the protein content, it's quite diverse, really. Like things like quinoa, buckwheat, all whole grain. Teff have a very high protein flour. Than, I mean, rice, we all know rice is nutritionally a bit challenged. Has a very low protein content. Dietary fiber content, again, you know, your pseudo cereals or those teff, they do always really well, where the others not so much. Folic acid, I would like to high in folic acid here with the quinoa. And then we have also obviously analyzed the iron and calcium content, but again, you have phytic acid in there as well, so it might not be so bioavailable. Okay, the next thing was then, okay, let's make bread out of these flours. So we had to even get some kind of a loaf, we had to adjust the water content. And you can see here the water content of the different breads. You can see none of them look so hot. You know, here's wheat as your control, and then you look at all the others. Dense little creatures. They look better than they taste. Okay, let me tell you that, and they look bad. So, and you can see that you need rice, for example, absorbs water like there is no tomorrow. So you had to add, even to get that miserable old bread, you had to add 120% water, baker's percentile, obviously. So, okay, going for any kind of a single grain is just not the way to go. That's what I want to tell you here. We also looked at under the microscope, and what I said at the start, when we look at these different grains, here we have the wheat flour, here we have quinoa, down here is maize. You can basically see, yeah, the starch granules, protein structure, etc. inside that kernel looks totally different to wheat. So that's the reason you can't apply anything to it either. Then when we look at the bread structure here, you have your partial gelatinization, here full gelatinization, which isn't surprising with 100% of water. What you find when you work in gluten-free, you also use a lot of starches. You don't use just your flours. Now, so we wanted to see, okay, what properties in starches would help us to make a good quality bread. And there has been some good work done on starch breads alone. So we did scanning and confocal laser microscopy. We analyzed the composition, the pasting properties, and the bread at the end. Here just shows you some of the starches which are commonly used in gluten-free system: potato, corn, rice, tapioca, and wheat starch. And you can see that the majority of the starches look very, very different to your standard wheat starch. So you don't have to only consider your protein, you also have to look at your starches. And the one which probably comes closest. Okay, thanks. Yeah, you get what you get. So we have the wheat starches here, and you have the potato starches here, and the potato starch is quite similar to your wheat starch, and that shows then when I look at the breads. These are model breads, don't taste particularly nice, but you can see the wheat starch bread actually looks, you know, what you expect from a nice white bread. Now obviously your rice starch does do nothing for it, but you know, potato for example, so we found that the starch, the granular structure, the behavior of the structure has a big impact of what you should be using in a gluten-free system. And potato starch is much more suitable, for example, than a rice starch is. So hydrocolloids, you can't make breads without hydrocolloids, and even in gluten-free now they're threatening us with clean label. I mean, really, they can't even make proper bread now. You want to have a clean label as well, but look, what can you do? So hydrocolloids are a group of polysaccharides. They can come from plants, trees, seaweed, etc. They modify your rheology and your texture. They are highly viscous, and you can't do without them. So what do we find? We find cellulose-based derivatives, locust bean gum, xanthan, guar gum, psyllium. They're the most commonly used one. Okay, now what happens if I don't use hydrocolloids? That's this bread here. And I've just used HPMC. HPMC and xanthan are the most commonly used one. If I add HPMC in my model, you can see it looks like a decent bread. Still doesn't taste like it. So since we are also wanting to go clean label, we said, oh God, what could we do now to get these hydrocolloids out of our gluten-free system? So since I'm a big fan of lactic acid bacteria, even the meat people would know those. They're part of the fermented beverage. The dairy people know them from yogurt making or cheese making. And in cereals, we make sourdough bread out of it. Big fan of it. So anyway, we have these lactic acid bacteria who have properties you wouldn't believe it. And one of them is to produce exopolysaccharides or slime former. You use them a lot in yogurt making. So these lactic acid bacteria can produce EPS, and they can produce two types. One is homopolysaccharides based on glucose or fructose, or heteropolysaccharides, which use all kinds of sugars. So usually we work with the homopolysaccharides because they produce more of those. So what we did, we screened for these lactic acid bacteria which are producing EPS. Then we characterized them and then added them in gluten-free system. Now, why would I even look at something like this? It's because they work so well in gluten-containing bread or in wheat bread. There, if I make a sourdough which contains EPS, my EPS forms a film over the starch granules, and you see that your bread doesn't go stale. So you don't need necessarily always to add the enzymes. You can also do it with other ways. And it also improves your volume. So again, you can also work with LAB and EPS and achieve a fair bit with that. So we thought, oh, sure, might be good in gluten-free. And then we looked how much EPS they can produce in gluten-free, and it is very much dependent on the source. In wheat, we produce buckwheat as well. But for example, teff and sorghum, we couldn't produce much because the sugar composition didn't suit our lactic acid bacteria. Then we looked at how it affects texture. It makes it lovely and soft in wheat, and it makes it quite nice and soft in buckwheat and quinoa. But for example, in sorghum, it did nothing. So it really shows you can use it for certain formulation, but you can't use it for others. Now, since we are here working on enzymes, I also looked at enzymes and the impact on gluten-free model bread systems. We looked at proteases, transglutaminases, lacases, oxidases. Now, since I have only limited time, I focus now on transglutaminase. So what we did, it makes sense. You want to form a network, so you put a transglutaminase in. Meat industry knows it is because you can make nice formed ham with your transglutaminase. I think that was the first source of where transglutaminase was used. So we screen our enzymes. We characterize the rheological properties, then we look at the bread and then try to understand it as well. So here are just the different flours we had, the buckwheat, the brown rice, the corn, and the oats. You only have to look at the bread to see that for some of them the transglutaminase really worked, and for others it didn't. It affected their rheological properties, and we could see a difference under laser scanning microscope. Oats, teff, and sorghum, it had no positive impact. Now here's just some of the bit more fundamental research, so that you see I don't only just bake. So we have here our bread which is untreated. Here is the treated bread. You can see an improvement in the structure. When we then isolated the protein, we could see larger agglomerates being formed. We could see under laser scanning microscope that you got a real tight network formation, and we could identify relatively large fractions in the 2D gels as well. So transglutaminase worked for some. How much time? 3 minutes. Okay, okay. We are also, you know, health is another big issue. So we wanted to look at the glycemic index. Most of you would be familiar with the glycemic index. It's used a lot for diabetics, where you basically measure how much sugar is released into your blood coming from a different source. Since we don't like working with people, we actually used a model system, and based on digestion with different enzymes, then dialysis, and it had been, this particular model system had been proven to be very much related to the more clinical approach where you work with people. So now we determined the glycemic index of our different breads. Wheat was set as 100. And you can see that all the gluten-free bread actually gave us a much lower GI. So we tried to understand this as well, and we could find that there was a decrease in GI with a decrease in gelatinization temperature and an increase in GI depending on the size of your kernels. We then, obviously being so big into sourdough, we then fermented our breads. And you find in wheat, when you ferment it with different lactic acid bacteria, and we used one which was a Weissella gibaria and the other one a Lactobacillus plantarum, they're producing different amounts of acid. Lactobacillus plantarum produce a lot, Weissella produce not so much. So the more acid I gave my sourdough produced, the lower was my glycemic index. And then I looked at the gluten-free, and they did nothing like it again. I mean, it was just totally higgledy-piggledy. And we couldn't fully understand it either. So I'm just showing you this. And it fully understand what happens in wheat, but not so much in gluten-free. Now, what's the right mix? The right mix is gluten-free cereal, small amount, enzymes, malt. Your water is crucial. Your protein source. Sourdough helps really with the flavor. You have to pick your hydrocolloids. You can't do without them. Tell your customer, clean label, forget it. And then starch, you have to have a bit of that in as well. Now, since I've been working so long, and about 5 years ago, an entrepreneur, he sold his normal bakery company, got very rich, and then he got bored, and he came to me. He said, "Oh, I like this gluten-free work you're doing. Would you develop a few products for us?" And he was the first one who ever showed any slight interest in what I was doing. So I was absolutely thrilled to develop all these products for him. And we really achieved lovely products after about 2 years of work. That's what they look like. They're nutritionally balanced. You know, they're high in protein, they're low in fat, they're very high in fiber and have lower calories. And in consumer studies, we did, people couldn't distinguish between the wheat bread and those breads. And your man made an absolute fortune out of it now. He's selling, I think, in 40 countries. He's employing, I don't know how many 100 people. Obviously, being a scientist, you got nothing out of it except for the glory. But at least I can say now I go in the supermarket, there is a product I developed from scratch. and I pointed out to everybody who wants to know every so often. It's nice to see your work, and because I did it for the celiacs, they have now a better product to eat, so that's an achievement. So also, if I have a bit of interest there, I did a couple of books, and this is where I come from. This is UCC, gluten-free UCC, and we have a conference coming up on the 18th and 19th of October in Ireland on gluten-free. Jan will be speaking as well. So I have two left. Sorry, Jan. So if anybody has a true interest, please talk to me. We still have a few places left. I promise you it'll be fun. It's going to be in Ireland, and our gala dinner is in Irish Distillers. So, and the next evening will be in my pilot scale brewery, which produces 1,000 litres of beer, not just 50 or something. So I can make gluten-free beer too. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for your attention. Sorry for
Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. And you have learned us about all the different raw materials that can be used, all the different processes, especially the hydrocolloids and the enzymes, and also that this basic research has led to products that even if you didn't make so much money, at least this company has become very rich. And that's, I think, is really what we want. If you're working in food science, you want to see your results ending up in products that are really useful for all these consumers. And since this conference is about additives and enzymes, what do you really see? Are these additives and enzymes very important for these products? And can you make even better products than you've done so far?
I think, I mean, you can't, when you look at the back of a gluten-free product and you see about 20 to 30 ingredients, and at the moment it's not possible to make it with any less. I think ingredients, enzymes, etc. will play even a bigger role in the gluten-free market than it is in the wheat market. But I do know from, if I use any commercial ingredients, be it emulsifiers, be it enzymes, etc., none of those really work in gluten-free. You have to really come up with a new set of ingredients, a new set of ideas, a new set of technology. For a certain amount, I have managed it. It's obviously all confidential, unfortunately. That kills, I think, a scientist, if you can't publish your best stuff because it goes to a commercial company, it's not very nice. But look, what can you do? Otherwise you don't get their stuff out. But you really have to think outside the box, and we need a couple of very new innovative ingredient solutions for gluten-free.
So, and I think in this case you have two categories. Those one who really must eat gluten-free, and then your favorite is those one who are quite healthy, but they think it's good for you. It's a lifestyle change. And for those, maybe, if they have some negative effect, which we don't know about, it may be a risk. But I mean, for those people who really need it, I mean, they have to eat it. So,
yeah.
So in that case, it's no problem. Thank you again for a very nice presentation.